Fashion as an industry, as we know it, really grew up around the invention of moving pictures. Some of the most iconic images of the 20th century are costumes that were designed for film.
Costume is character. A good costume should stand out, but also seamlessly be part of the movie. It should convey who the person is, but also who they want to be. It should convey part of the story, where they are in the moment of the plot. And it also has to look natural to the person. It has to look like something someone has worn or is wearing in real life.
Costumes are a huge part of a film's legacy. It's what people remember, it's what people dress as for Halloween. So even a bad movie can be totally remembered because of the costumes.
Marie Antoinette is the ultimate costume picture. It was a film that we all were lusting after because we saw photos of the costumes before its release.
Well, you can't talk about the costumes in Marie Antoinette without talking about the incredible costumer Milena Canonero. 9 Oscar nominations, 4 wins.
Canonero is clearly an artist and a mathematician at the same time. We're not talking about cliched, done before sort of costumes of that era. We're talking about like dazzling, perfect, immaculate, exquisite, fabulous works of art, but for extras, for secondary characters, for like Sofia Coppola just frames so wide.
She looks like a teenager from that, what would be from that time, who has endless amounts of resources. Even though everyone else around her is dressed quite in opulent and very decadent attire, she stands out because she's the brightest. From her really delicate jewelry to her chokers or hat or gloves that are fingerless, so that she can turn the pages in her Bible at church. There's so many small details, little furs and laces.
There's the great opening shot of Marie Antoinette where she is sort of with feathers in her hair and little pink shoes, and she's licking the icing off a cake. And of course, there's the idea that every costume in Marie Antoinette is basically the color of cake or cake icing, the color of a macaron. And in fact, even the color names are edible: lavender, rose, champagne, cinnamon. You get these beautiful bonbon colors, and it just makes you want to eat this world, and it's perfect for Marie Antoinette.
Just when you thought Dracula had been done to death all throughout the Hammer horror cycle, the Universal monsters, the various permutations of the 70s and 80s, here comes Francis Ford Coppola to take us all the way back to the source material. Somewhat, anyway.
Eiko Ishioka and Francis Ford Coppola knew that one of the most important things they had to do was throw away the iconography of Dracula. He couldn't have a cape, he couldn't wear a tuxedo, all these things had existed since the dawn of film. And Coppola was lucky because Eiko Ishioka had actually never seen a Dracula film before.
The mood of the film is about, there's a great line that Van Helsing has.
In fact, civilization and civilization have advanced together.
So the movie is interested in orderliness and reason and law versus these sort of wild, inflamed passions. And you see that in the costuming, the sort of Victorian, very buttoned-up world coming undone as these sort of swaths of red and these draping gowns sort of explode out onto the screen.
Something that Eiko achieves in her costume design that I think is singular, that stands out in all of her work, is the integration of the character, the costume, and the room they're in. It's an almost womb that they invite you into. It is umbilical, the way she attaches the costume to the set. It feels like the entire frame is designed around this one person.
When it comes to the design of Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's important to know that Coppola was working on a very limited budget, and he told his production team that the costumes will be the set and the set will be the lighting to try to cover for things he could not afford. Ishioka is one of those rare people who won an Oscar on her first nomination, and she brought that design sense even to her Oscar speech, where she actually thanked the designer of the Oscar.
hard to think about Clueless without fashion, but it's also hard to think about 90s fashion without Clueless. And Mona May's creations, while she does obviously take some of the trends that were already existing in the 90s, she ends up setting a lot of trends for that decade.
She actually didn't have a lot to work with. She had a budget of something like $200,000, and she had to be really creative within that, and I think that's why the costumes are so iconic, because she had to make some big choices and big moves, and you could really see that pay off on screen.
In the famous parking lot scene where Cher is held hostage, and she says, "This isn't a lie."
All right, now get down on the ground, face down. Come on.
Oh no. You don't understand. This isn't a liar.
And a what?
It's like a totally important designer.
She is wearing an Elia dress, but the coat that she's wearing was made by Mona May. So there's like these small homemade touches that add this extra characterization.
The film never tries to age her up. It kind of just lets her be a 16-year-old girl. And she's a very fashionable 16-year-old girl who has access to a wardrobe that most 16-year-old girls would kill for, but she still has that teenageness to her. And I think even her iconic kind of yellow two-piece that is kind of the item of clothing from Clueless, it almost feels like something that you could see a girl dressing up her Barbie in.
I feel like girls today are still wearing what Cher wears. That little backpack that she has, that's something that I wore when I was 12 years old, and I still wear today. And I always will wear because Cher showed me the way.
Name me a costume from a movie that's in the Smithsonian. I'll start. Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. This costume is one of the most iconic costumes in cinema history. And one of the reasons for that is because Wizard of Oz was one of the early movies to come out in Technicolor. So in the original book, The Wizard of Oz, the ruby slippers aren't ruby. They're actually silver. But for the film, they wanted something that was going to read better in Technicolor. So they changed the silver slippers to be ruby slippers. And now those slippers are in the Smithsonian.
The Wizard of Oz was really a fascinating challenge for MGM chief costumer Adrian. Adrian was somebody who is known for his gowns and known for making women look beautiful and glamorous. In fact, there's a great story that the witch was originally cast as actress Gail Sondergaard, but when you saw her screen tests, she looked so beautiful and glamorous, they immediately recast the role.
The way that Dorothy looks in The Wizard of Oz has to kind of tie you into normalcy because she's going to a fantasy land, but also be elevated in some way, that by the end of the movie, you feel that she has integrated into the world that she's been transported to.
Famously, Shirley Temple was considered for the role, and that was kind of the age that the character actually was. So the costume is doing a lot of heavy lifting in making her seem age appropriate for the character.
Judy Garland, to make her look younger, they were actually binding her breasts very painfully whenever she's in the Dorothy costume to make her seem younger. There's a lot of suffering for one's art happening in this movie.
The costumes in Legally Blonde are designed by Sophie Durakoff, who would also work with Reese on many other films like Sweet Home Alabama and Legally Blonde 2, Red, White, and Blonde, and really got to the core of what works on Reese and what looks great on Reese. And I think she's at her highest powers here in Legally Blonde and creating Elle Woods.
Specifically, they chose to show Elle's intelligence through clothing because the thesis of the film is that loving clothes, being girly, is not an antithesis to being brilliant. They can be the same thing.
It's one of a kind.
It's impossible to use a half-loop top stitching on low viscosity rayon. It would snag the fabric. And you didn't just get it in. I saw it in the June Vogue a year ago. So if you're trying to sell it to me for full price, you picked the wrong girl.
Elle conveys this sort of American dream of assurance and payoff, which is this idea that if you actually work hard enough at something, you can do it. So her image, her costuming, the way that she's presented to us, her makeup and hairstyling, all of that is contributing to this idea that she shouldn't be going to Harvard, and she does, and ergo, anything can happen in America.
She comes into class wearing this amazing turquoise jacket that makes her stand out from all the khaki and all the cardigans, and immediately the teacher picks on her and says, you know, she doesn't know what she's talking about, which is so silly because if anything, she's more prepared than other people emotionally to be there, and she's excited to be there, and it sucks that just looking at her, they underestimate her.
Legally Blonde is really about how we judge people, and we shouldn't. And that judgment is often based on how someone appears, the kinds of clothes that they wear. Elle faces a lot of discrimination because of how she's dressed. And the film really proves, in terms of fashion, that you can't judge a book by its cover.
Science fiction works best when it's deeply inventive, and I feel like a lot of filmmakers tend to focus on technology and vehicles and gadgets when they're, creating this not too distant future. But where The Fifth Element stands out is that it's so fleshed out and beautifully illustrated in its fashion. From the bombastic ruby rod to the Hitler-inspired Zorg, Jean-Paul Gaultier never misses an opportunity to modernize or tweak every little thing.
Mila was the one who just thought about hospital gowns. She thought about when you go to a hospital, they give you these very kind of paper-thin gowns that are very loose, and they have a lot of room for injections, poking and prodding, all of those really uncomfortable things. And she brought that idea to Jean-Paul Gaultier, and he ran with that and went with bandages, which, of course, is similar to hospital imagery.
Bruce Willis's character is really outfitted in such a unique way. He's kind of throwing back to his action hero status, but also it's got that futuristic look to it. It's got holes in the back, so you can see that high fashion aspect. He's like this all-American hero, but a high-tech one.
But you also have just the regular look and feel of this world. The cops are in very bulky type costumes, these massive helmets. But even the jackets that they wear feel almost like mech wear, even though it's all clothing. Anyone who's wearing a hat or even a headpiece is a servant to someone. And it really does add a unique flair to this futuristic world that the film is creating.
That was a time when we took risks with costume design. I feel like, movies now, we don't get ridiculous costumes anymore. I think science fiction costumes need to be insane again. When can we go back to the day where our heroes had orange hair and our villains had half their hair?
I'm still waiting for modern fashion to catch up with The Fifth Element, and when it does, I think I'm probably going to quit my job and become a flight attendant.
Grease is a fascinating example of how the emergence of teen culture or youth culture only began really in the 1950s. The term teenager starts in the 1940s, but it's not until the baby boom that we see it depicted on screen.
Grease is a musical that sort of lives and dies by the costumes in it because greasers were so concerned with their looks that it became sort of part of their entire personality. You look at a character like Danny, how much he cares about his hair, how meticulous he is about his jacket, all of that stuff really adds to his idea that how people perceive him is really important. And that is so much a part of the story that he feels like he can't be with this girl because he doesn't want to be perceived differently.
Sandy! Danny? What are you doing here? I thought you were going back to Australia.
We had a change of plans.
I can't... Well, that's cool, baby. I mean, you know how it is, rocking and rolling and whatnot.
Danny?
I think Albert Wolski's background in theatrical costuming really comes through in his vision of the Pink Ladies. Wolski really credits director Randall Kleiser with coming up with the idea of big color throughout the film. He wanted so much color that Wolski said he realized that this is not a period piece, this is a fantasy piece. He might as well go totally over the top. Something Albert Wolski points out when it comes to clothes being confident is the performance of Olivia Newton-John. He said, as a person, she naturally did not dress like Sandy did, and really dressed more like we see Sandy in the finale. So he said once she put those clothes on, she was a totally different person, and you really see that in the performance.
Very famously, Olivia Newton-John had to be sewn into the notorious black pants. Olivia Newton-John held on to these pants for a very long time. She eventually auctioned them for charity, and the person who bought them could not have been more appropriate. It ended up being the founder of Spanx, who designed her entire company based on this one pair of pants used in Greece. To this day, they are still framed and hanging at Spanx headquarters.
Of course, what we think of when we think of Breakfast at Tiffany's is the little black dress. The little black dresses, in fact, they were supplied to wardrobe to Edith Head by Hubert de Givenchy, who had worked with Audrey Hepburn very successfully on Sabrina and caused a sensation with his Paris fashions. Little black dress is really hard to get right because black is unforgiving. You can't hide a bad design or a bad construction or cheap fabric in a little black dress. And so it has to be expertly cut. And the little black dresses in this movie are.
Something people may not know about the black dress at the start of Breakfast at Tiffany's is it actually had to involve a last-minute redesign. Under Givenchy's supervision, Edith Head had to lengthen it because censors found it to be a little too short. So while he chose all the accessories, the gloves, the sunglasses, the jewels, the length ended up just being all Edith Head.
Taxi!
I never could do that.
It's easy. It establishes Holly as a woman who is outside of the traditional clock. She is working at nighttime, that's what her work is, so she's wearing an evening dress during the day. And I think that that is such an important part of defining this character and letting you know who she is. And I think that the Givenchy costumes and the partnership between Edith Head and Givenchy was really perfect.
Of Givenchy, Audrey Hepburn said, "His are the only clothes in which I am myself." This is a creative relationship that lasted until Hepburn's death in 1993. It's really the preeminent fashion designer-muse relationship of film history. It's almost as though Givenchy is as responsible for Audrey Hepburn as Audrey Hepburn is. In 1915, when Les Vampires was being filmed, production was shut down because censors saw Musadora wearing a catsuit, and it was too much to handle. The 1996 Irma Vep is really about the art of costume design. It's a very meta film. We see here how Maggie Cheung's character is transformed. She's an actress playing herself in real life who arrives to a set and she's really challenged by the fact that she doesn't speak French. She's kind of getting through with English, but she has a really hard time with the character of Irma Vep until she puts on the catsuit.
You know, it's very important to be simple. You don't play, you don't think about your part. You just be yourself.
It's not so easy in this.
No. It's like a mask for the whole body that makes you absolutely free, right?
Most of the time when a film wants to imbue its central character with a lot of erotic power, you do so by, revealing certain degrees of flesh. But one of the really delicious things about Irma Vep is that they go exactly the opposite route. The main costume that Maggie Cheung wears in the film as Irma Vep covers her head to toe in latex. It's a costume that's actually sourced in a BDSM shop. And when she's wearing it, she literally looks like she's been dipped in liquid darkness.
The light just kind of reflects off of it in such an amazing way. You see the latex just, crumple and fold with her every movement. And it's something that simultaneously absorbs lights, but also reflects it in this just glorious way.
It's as simple a costume as possible. In some ways, it's defined by the person who wears it because it doesn't leave that much to the imagination, and yet also it just conveys or confers such a sense of mysteriousness. And the fact that it's equally beguiling in 1903, 1994, 2023 says something about it, I think, as one of the great pieces of costume design of all time.
I don't think there's ever been a more uncomfortable costume created, and yet somehow when you interview actresses like Maggie Cheung or Alicia Vikander, they really talk about how they became one with this catsuit, and while they don't miss wearing it because of how uncomfortable it was, they miss the power that it gave them.
What is your ultimate vision of the Joker?
Oh, I think of a zoot suit party dude, a middle-aged actor who loves Prince. That's what I think. Now, is there a movie for me?
Well, I have one here. It's Tim Burton's Batman, where the Joker is portrayed by one Jack Nicholson.
The Joker's colors of purple, white, and green are very high contrast. They're not colors you usually mix in fashion, so they really catch the eye. And somebody that really loved these colors was Jack Nicholson, who apparently demanded that the purple be the exact Lakers purple.
I like how branded the Joker gang is in that Batman movie. They've all got these leather Joker jackets that have the Joker's logo and face on them. I found that just such an amusing detail. Brand identity is very important to the Joker.
So if you were around and paying attention to films in the 2000s, there was really no costume that got talked about more than Heath Ledger's Joker. And you still, every Halloween, will see half a dozen of them because that is how beloved that costume is.
Like everything else in those movies, it's meant to be gritty and realistic and nihilistic. And so from the makeup on down, he kind of just looks raggedy, that was a very sort of dirty, unkempt, disheveled Joker. And the emphasis is so much on Ledger's performance. It kind of pops out from the costume, right, instead of being sort of guided by it.
Joaquin Phoenix's Joker has the honor of being dressed by Mark Bridges, who did some of the great films like Phantom Thread. His Joker is obviously trying to be an 80s period piece, a little more realist, and what they build the costume out of is actually costume pieces you see throughout the film. His clown suit, his stand-up outfit. But the interesting thing is, once he becomes the Joker, the colors on all those outfits are ramped way up. One thing that's very fascinating about costuming the Joker is the Joker can kind of be anything in the comics and in cinema, but you know when it goes wrong. So when somebody like Jared Leto tries to be the Joker and it's way off brand, the fans do get mad.
Kill Bill does that amazing thing where it makes iconic a costume that was already iconic.
That's right, the costume worn by Uma Thurman's character, the Bride, the yellow costume with the black stripes, is based on the costume that Bruce Lee wore in his unfinished final film, Game of Death.
Quentin's got that on Game of Death. His, Volume 1 is just such a roller coaster of awesome action sequences, and none are more awesome when Uma finally gets into the iconic yellow and starts slicing up the Crazy 88. And yellow just turns out to be an incredible canvas for blood.
It's not just that we have a yellow tracksuit here. She arrives to this location with a yellow motorcycle helmet. She has this yellow, gorgeous leather coat. And I think with the scene of her kind of removing it is this idea that she's taking off a hard shell.
Another amazing outfit in this is the one that Lucy Liu wears as Oren Ishii. Obviously, the final battle of that film is a huge homage to Maiko Kaji and Lady Snowblood. It's also really interesting too, Lucy Liu's character being half Japanese and half Chinese. I feel like that is a perfect marriage of the two elements of martial arts that Quentin Tarantino is referencing, because you've got the Kung Fu with the Crazy 88 and all the Bruce Lee iconography. Then you have Lady Snowblood being referenced, and they're in Tokyo, her being half Chinese and half Japanese. Just folds those two references beautifully together in the film.
Hong Kong in 1962 was clearly a great time to wear gorgeous outfits. And there's a lot of women that you see in The Mood for Love wearing dresses very similar to Maggie Cheung's. But none of them look quite like Maggie Cheung looks in those dresses.
What Wong Kar-wai does so excellently in this film, along with William Chang, the costume designer, is show Maggie Cheung's character wearing these really, really gorgeous dresses. And in Chinese, it's the traditional cheongsam that we wear. But Tony Leung's character and most of the men, they're all wearing Western suits. And that was becoming more and more in the trend back in the 50s. It places the film in its historical context. And Tony Leung has said in interviews that the dresses that Maggie was wearing, they reminded him of the ones that his own mother was wearing when he was young.
What does the dress tell you in this film? It's beautiful. Maggie's beautiful. This love story is beautiful. But it's constricted. It's armor. And she wears this armor, maybe hides behind it, expresses herself, but also hides within it.
The sense of the film is a lot of repetition. It's a lot of the same angles and the same passageways, the same crossing each other in the corridor. And one of the only ways we delineate the passage of time is through Maggie Cheung's change of clothes.
There's a scene where they are outside in the rain, and because of the nature of society, she can't be seen with his umbrella. So In the Mood for Love really finds complexity in the human condition. It finds love and passion in the simple things all through the way that people are dressed and how that clothing and the various environments they operate in intersect.
For the majority of her career, 8 films in total, Marilyn Monroe worked with costumer William Trevilla. He was a bit of a jobber at Warner Brothers, but he'd recently won an Oscar for The Adventures of Don Juan. Trevilla was very inspired by Marilyn. In fact, it's said that he completed all 10 sketches for the 7-Year Itch over one weekend.
The most famous look in this film, of course, is the one from the subway grate scene. It's got the halter and the pleats, and it moves really beautifully in the air that rises up from the subway. And the really interesting thing about that scene is that it was sort of manufactured to be iconic.
It's not just that the white halter dress is one of the most iconic dresses of all time. The image of Marilyn in it makes it one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. This is really what a dress can do. It can define a moment in history.
Trevilla points to Gentlemen Prefer Blondes as a great example of how Marilyn moved as well. He said that the dress in the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend sequence may have been made out of cardboard for how much it moved.
The original costume designed by Trevilla was a sort of a body stocking, fishnet body stocking, with very strategically placed appliques over the bust and over the rear. But the timing didn't really work out for them to be able to use this costume for a couple of reasons. One is that Marilyn Monroe's nude photographs that she'd taken as a young upcoming actress came out shortly before the film started production. At the very last minute, 2 days before shooting, Trevilla came up with the dress that is now iconic, which was a sort of a pink peau de soie that he lined, again, as a concession to modesty so that it wouldn't hug her curves too much, with that sort of green felt that you see on billiard tables, which gives it some structure when she shimmies through.
This dress is aggressively hot pink. I think it came to define what we think of as hot pink, and the saying "think pink" absolutely comes out of this film.
It's impressive when your costumes for a movie set any sort of trend going. It's insanely impressive when you create an entire new genre of fashion. And that's exactly what Kim Barrett did with The Matrix. Her designs for The Matrix are innovative, they're functional, they're cool, they're effortless. And I think it's because she really took into account the movement of the actors. These were all people that were going to have to do their own stunts. They were going to be on wires. They were going to be uncomfortable for hours. How do you give them something that will live and breathe and exist and that they can kind of move in, but also look effortlessly cool?
Neo's costuming and his wardrobe really maps out his journey. He starts out as a worker drone with a white shirt and a black tie.
As you can see, we've had our eye on you for some time now, Mr. Anderson. It seems that you've been living two lives.
It's kind of ill-fitting. It doesn't quite match his personality because, you know, he's this like techie guy. And when he finally takes the red pill, he is fitted out in this beautiful, almost like a priest's coat.
The stuff that people wear on the spaceships when we supposedly come to the real world. You know, you look at Neo's costume there, it's all rags, it's all torn apart. There's something very Christ-like and humble about those costumes, like as if like Christ has resurrected from the grave.
What Kim Barrett really does well here is that she makes the clothing look so drab and so, kind of sounds silly, but cotton-like, in that that is the kind of material that would have been available. Then when they go into The Matrix, she has said in interviews that she wanted the characters to be dressed in the way that that's how they see themselves. So they see themselves as these kind of modern-day superheroes. So Neo is given, obviously, the long duster jacket, which is very, very iconic to the character now. But that forms as a bit of a cape for him. That's his Superman cape, without being Superman.
Sally Potter had been working on Orlando since the mid-'80s. This was a partnership between her and fashion icon Tilda Swinton. And one of the ways they got this film financed is by staging these glorious photos with Tilda Swinton dressed as Orlando. Sandy Powell had a real challenge in designing for Orlando because these were costumes that had to move. We see Tilda Swinton's character ice skating. We see Tilda Swinton's character running. We see her riding a horse. We see her in a motorcycle with a sidecar. These had to be very exquisite art pieces, but also be functional.
One of my favorite costume moments in this film is this iconic scene, which actually really inspired the Met exhibition, which is the scene where the character played by Tilda Swinton, Orlando, goes into a maze in one era's costume and emerges from the end of the maze in another era's costume. It's an incredibly visually arresting scene, and it takes you from one place in time to another, which the film does throughout.
There's so many nods from Orlando's character to the audience that involve costume. When Orlando transitions from a male to a female, there's a real challenge in wearing corsetry for the first time. In the Rococo period, Orlando's really wearing these gigantic gowns, so gigantic that she can't even move through a hallway properly. She's constantly bumping into things. The challenge of trying to sit in one of these gowns on a settee is hilarious. It's kind of played up for slapstick.
Orlando uses clothing to make you contemplate how obsessed our society is with gender and appearance, and how one's appearance really will set you either on a positive course or a negative course. The way that clothing can be both entrapping and also freeing.
The costumes for Almost Famous were designed by Betsy Hyman, and Penny is famously not a groupie, but what she calls a band-aid. Someone is there for the music above all else.
Kate Hudson wears the same pair of jeans, the same pair of cutoff shorts, and a variety of sort of little tops, and the same kind of ratty coat with the big fur collar over and over and over again. And that lends a real kind of unconscious authenticity to the movie. I think Billy Crudup, playing the charismatic rock god, wears the same tan shirt in about half the movie. I'm pretty sure it's velour, and you can almost smell the 70s. The example where you really see clothes as indicators of vulnerability, the best, I think, is in that great scene where our hero is telling Penny Lane that the band has traded her for a case of beer.
Maybe it is love, as much as it can be for somebody.
Who sold you to humble pie for $50 and a case of beer? I was there. I was there.
He's telling her this thing that's very, very hard for her to take, and she's at her kind of most vulnerable and also her most kind of golden, glorious, hippie chick hair in the sunshine. And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful moment, and the costume really underlines that.
And her scenes with William at the end, where we really understand just how much self-knowledge she has, it becomes heartbreaking. And for the first time, you see her as somebody who's sort of aging out of the look that she has, as well as the world that she lives in. You can tell this isn't going to work for her for much longer. And part of that is the costumes, is the specific choices of the stuff she's wearing, where it's starting to age out too. Like, she's out of fashion, and that's going to hurt.
Elizabeth and Elizabeth the Golden Age are both by Shekhar Kapoor. Costumes are both by Alexandra Byrne. The films are both about capturing a really specific moment in English and European history. And I think the movies are really interestingly and beautifully capturing the way Elizabeth is learning how stage managing her own appearance is itself a kind of realpolitik.
There's this really interesting sartorial attempt to have her costume be much less conducive to, things like frolicking, and much more conducive to things like being impressive in a debate or being sort of paraded past her subjects. The goal is to be impressive, it's to be intimidating. It's not always that costumes are built into the story of a film in the way that they are in the first Elizabeth movie, where one of her potential suitors, the Vincent Cassel character, being in the wrong costuming is actually implicitly the move that makes her stop pursuing a husband entirely because she's caught one of her suitors in drag, dressed, I should say, to look pretty much exactly like her.
Although my affection for you is undiminished, I have, after an agonizing struggle, determined to sacrifice my own happiness for the welfare of my people.
Oh, my God.
Byrne would go on to win an Academy Award for Elizabeth the Golden Age. And I think it's really interesting because she then transitions to designing for Marvel films. But if you look at Elizabeth the Golden Age, we have that fantastic costume of Elizabeth wearing metal armor. It is completely based on fantasy. It's not something that we know that Elizabeth wore, but it's very Marvel-esque to me. So I think that jump from this, very art house history picture to designing for Guardians of the Galaxy makes sense.
James Cameron was famously obsessed with making everything in Titanic as accurate as he could get it. That very much extended into the costumes.
From the moment that we see her get out of that car in that giant purple hat, which establishes her as the main character, but also tells us that she's a woman of wealth, we know that Rose is someone to watch.
Deborah Lynn Scott points out a very interesting challenge in Titanic's costuming, and Rose's especially, is that just about everything has to get wet. It has to do stunts. This is an action film, so even if you have a beautiful beaded dress, you have to have multiples of it because those are just gonna fall off. One of the hardest dresses to make for Rose was the dress she wears as the ship goes down. This dress had to flow well in water, it had to look good underwater, it had to look good regularly, and also it had to be made from something that was tough. So they made this chiffon dress where most of the ornamentation is actually dyed in.
And there's something interesting about the part of the film after which everyone on the ship, regardless of gender, regardless of class, has on a life jacket that is this equalizing force. Clothing is this shorthand for how you're treated as a person, which in a very morbid sense, as far as the history of RMS Titanic goes, translates to probably whether you were going to survive that evening.
The 1971 original Shaft is directed, of course, by Gordon Parks, one of the greatest photographers of the 20th century. He was the first African-American staff photographer at Life magazine, and he covered everything from social issues, racial injustice and poverty, to entertainment and a lot of fashion. So he knew what he was talking about when he selected the way he wanted Shaft to look. But what's also interesting is that Richard Roundtree, of course, early in his career, was a fashion model. He worked for Ebony Fashion Fair, their traveling fashion shows, and posed a lot for Ebony magazine in their fashion spreads. So he really also knew how to embody and elevate the clothes that he was given.
When Shaft is wearing the brown leather, he's looking very Frank Lucas. When he's wearing the black leather, he's looking very Black Panther Party. And so what's beautiful about this character, this cop character, is that he's the undercover cop that can also get in with the bad guys, get in with the drug dealers, get in with the pimps. So his costumes is not meant to set him apart from some of the people he's working against. He's not meant to look like a cop. He's meant to look like a part of Harlem.
I love that in Shaft the clothes are really practical. That can be really challenging to create something that stands out in the time that you're actually making it. When everyone's wearing jeans and t-shirts, how do you make it special?
Richard Roundtree in that part, and just that effortless cool that he sort of wore it with, and that sense of being in that sort of swinging, gritty early 70s moment. You never forget the way that John Shaft looks.
After Rushmore, director Wes Anderson was almost given carte blanche to create the story and the world of the Royal Tenenbaums as he sees fit. And you see a very highly stylized, extremely color-focused characterization in each of the characters of the Tenenbaums and their retinue.
Every character in this film wears a costume that just completely defines that character, and the wardrobe designer Karen Patch said that she wanted to portray a family in decline.
What these costumes do so brilliantly in the Royal Tenenbaums is they never change. Every character gets a look, and they wear that look throughout the whole movie. But you really can't talk about the costumes in the Royal Tenenbaums without talking about the mink coat that Margot, Gwyneth Paltrow, wears throughout. And what makes me laugh every time is that when we flash back to young Margot, she's wearing a smaller version of the same coat, which is hilarious to me because it suggests that the coat actually grows with her as she comes along.
The Royal Tenenbaums has some very poignant elements in its costume design. I think about Ben Stiller's character of Chaz. Unlike his siblings who, well into adulthood, keep wearing the same costumes they wore more or less as children, he changes his costume because he's suffered this tragedy, he's lost his wife, and so although he is, normally wearing a business suit, he winds up changing into a warm-up suit because he goes from someone who is perpetually prepared for business to someone who is perpetually prepared for disaster.
You're not supposed to notice costume design at all. It's that thing that's invisible but perfectly writ large on screen, except in certain moments. And Ursula Andress stepping out of the Jamaican beachfront in the original James Bond movie, Dr. No, is one of those moments.
The bikini in Dr. No almost didn't happen. Ursula Andress arrived in Jamaica and found that none of her costumes were complete. Luckily, in Rome, she'd met actress and fashion designer Tessa Prendergast and knew that she lived in Jamaica, so she reached out to her. She got some bras from America and added fabric to create the bikini. Part of Honey Rider's bikini that's important is also, of course, her scabbard. This is a tactical bikini. She is not Botticelli's Venus. She has a knife.
Tessa Prendergast is a real costume design pioneer. She was a Black woman designing for James Bond. This was a really big deal because there were not a lot of Black female costume designers working in mainstream Hollywood.
The iconic white bikini is actually referenced in Daniel Craig's debut as James Bond in Casino Royale, as he emerges from the waves in a similar fashion to reveal his big beefy bod.
It's a wonderful callback, obviously, to Ursula Andress in Dr. No, and to some extent Halle Berry in Die Another Day, but it eroticizes James Bond very explicitly, which is, I think, very appreciated by the series, female and queer viewers, and it's also sort of a challenge to the series' straight male masculine fan base to sort of be like, well, this isn't just James Bond looking cool in a suit, here is like full-on Daniel Craig beefcake.
This European cut of bathing suit was a huge sensation in 2006, and I suspect a lot of women bought the same bathing suit for their partners, but probably to a lot lesser effect than Daniel Craig wearing it.
Velvet Goldmine is one of those movies where costume designer Sandy Powell actually sought it out. She knew that there was a movie coming with a David Bowie-like character, and glam rock had really inspired her to get into costuming, so she needed to be a part of it.
Sandy Powell is someone who is known for her period costumes. It's who you call when you need someone who, number one, can work on a budget and can make things look amazing for nothing, and number two, someone who gives you this sort of historical ambiguity. She can give you the accuracy, but the ambiguity is what sort of gives this stuff this mythical, magical quality.
The opening sequence of Velvet Goldmine is unforgettable. We have the musician Brian Slade being shot on stage, and the costume that Sandy Powell designs for this sequence is probably the greatest use of feathers on screen minus Big Bird.
As with Bowie's actual life and career, there's this big sense of completely dropping a chapter of one's life and moving on to the next one, in part by just totally changing your look. As Brian Slade progresses as a superstar, his attire becomes even more metallic and less human.
The other great showcase aspect of Velvet Goldmine is that it really revives on the screen and actually memorializes on the screen a lot of bygone fashion labels. You have the people who dressed the Rolling Stones, like Tommy Nutter. You have Mr. Fish, who made dresses for men and dressed David Bowie and Mick Jagger. The vintage was fairly easy to find, only 25, 30 years after the actual moment happened in the culture.
I would just like to personally thank Sandy Powell for putting Ewan McGregor in those tight black leather pants. He's shirtless, he's covered in body glitter, he's very sweaty. He's the sexiest incarnation of Iggy Pop imaginable.
Ruthie Carter is known for being the first Black woman to win a Best Costume Oscar, but she's also the first costumer to win an Oscar for a superhero film. color is incredibly important in the Black Panther films, and you'll notice that most of our heroes are the colors of the Pan-African flag, black, green, and red. And Ryan Coogler very specifically designed Killmonger to be blue to be reflective of the police state.
So when I think of Black Panther and Wakanda Forever, and specifically their aesthetics, I'm looking at the set designs, I'm looking at the costumes by Ruthie Carter. I mean, she's been making costumes since what, Do the Right Thing and before, but here specifically, she is translating like so much Afrofuturistic artwork, and what you're seeing here is you know, African cultural traditions being translated through a sci-fi lens. You know, like the Dora Milaje, these women queen warriors, they're wearing these cultural traditional outfits or these colors, but they got like the Iron Man treatment, right? Shuri gave them the vibranium powers.
Every aspect of the costume, from the tabard, which is sort of the apron-like front that is made out of a stretched leather, to the beadwork, to the nature of the almost jewelry-like neck pieces and armbands, are all well thought out, and they are each chosen as part of the craftsmanship from different parts of the African continent. So for example, the gold rings on the warriors are sort of a riff on the Ndebele tribe's neck pieces, except that they're rendered in that sort of brass. And in fact, for the movie, they're made by a jewelry designer.
Ruthie Carter is an amazing researcher, and something she found out while working on the vision of Wakanda was basically anything we know as an African fabric is a byproduct of Dutch colonialism. Because Wakanda is supposed to be never colonized, she had to reach further back into essentially indigenous African design to try to create the fashion vision of a world that's never seen colonization.
There's no denying Xanadu's influence on fashion, and you could thank that brilliant costume designer Bobby Mannix for the leg warmer craze.
Xanadu is really the silly side of costume design, and it shouldn't be taken too seriously. This is an Australian actress, Olivia Newton-John, just kind of fresh off of Greece, coming to a Hollywood film dressed as a Greek muse, sometimes dressed as an alien, sometimes dressed as a diva, sometimes dressed as a cowgirl, sometimes dressed in the 1940s like she's a USO performer. It's a lot when it comes to costumes.
In terms of the relationship between disco and the Greek muses and Grecian gowns, I think it really ends up coming down to this idea of like a very loose kind of vibrant femininity, which is really embodied in those like massive white dresses that drape to the floor. They're designed, I would say, specifically for dancing. They're very accessible, they're very movable.
The 80s sure loved a shopping montage, and we are treated to a pretty fabulous small sequence where mannequins come to life and everyone's dancing. Gene Kelly's moving and shaking like no 68-year-old ever has before. I love his white tasseled rhinestoned cowboy getup that he sports during this montage, and we see this outfit come back in the final number with Olivia Newton-John and the other muses. They're wearing a more feminine version of the costume, but it's a great callback. It's the Olivia Newton-John show we're being treated to, and with every outfit, she just keeps one-upping herself.
In 1959, Yves Saint Laurent launched his fashion house and started revolutionizing women's fashions. Just a few years later, in 1964, he was hired by Louis Buñuel to design the outfits for Catherine Deneuve in Belle de Jour. The costumes for Belle de Jour would initiate a 50-year relationship between Deneuve and Yves Saint Laurent. He would dress her almost entirely for all of her films, as well as her personal life.
In the scene where Séverine first goes to infiltrate the world of the brothel, we see her in the street wearing black wraparounds and this black wool, very large pillbox hat, this gray peacoat, and she does look like a young woman, you know, wearing an idea of going undercover.
This film, as far as Séverine's character goes, has to communicate a lot in terms of class. This line of work is not one that she has been forced into, and so there is this attempt to distinguish her as different from her colleagues. There's also a moment where she's speaking with her prospective madam, where she's told, you know, you're about to lose a button.
Je parie que c'est la première fois que vous travaillez. Bon, ça n'est pas bien terrible, vous savez. Il est encore trop tôt, vos camarades ne sont pas là. Vous allez perdre votre bouton. Quand voudriez-vous commencer?
Je ne sais pas. There's something about her clothes that seem like they're on the cusp of some big change, and a less, you know, clothes-conscious director may not have worked that one in there.
Tony Scott's The Hunger is what I consider the perfect fish tank film. It's a great movie you should just have on sometimes, just being there, just like a fish tank. It's a beautiful film.
Yves Saint Laurent's designs are so effective in these films because they are sexy, but refined. They are strong and cutting and not living. They don't feel flowy or movement-filled like you would expect of a living, moving thing. And it really mirrors back that this film is about the dead, the dying, those that are clinging to life in a way that they can't quite get a grasp on.
Ziegfeld Follies and Ziegfeld Girls are not movies per se, as much as they are glamorous showcases for costume designers.
The Follies were known for their extremely elaborate outfits. They were inspired by the Folies Bergère, and part of what they loved was essentially weighing a woman down with such elaborate clothes, but she still moved around smoothly. That's kind of the trick. And you really see that with people like Hedy Lamarr and the crazy constellation she wears.
My favorite sequence from Ziegfeld Follies is the Esther Williams sequence. This is very simplified costuming. It's entirely filmed with Esther Williams, who is known as a swimming acrobat, underwater. And she's wearing a very simple white bathing suit. This bathing suit is so iconic, it is still made today. Esther Williams' estate manages a huge asset when it comes to bathing suits that you can buy in stores, and it's the same cut from 1945.
What's really fascinating about the Follies and the costume that they choose is their weaving together the American love of industry, the industrial complexes of like Ford machinery and the Chrysler building, and all of these very Art Deco, Ayn Randian levels of love of progress and American idealism, and narrowing it right down onto this, we can sell this to you on a woman's body.
Fashion and film have always gone hand in hand. It's one of the most symbiotic relationships between two artistic industries. Costume design isn't just for period films, it's for all film. It's for Marvel films, it's for kids films, it's for every film that you have seen. There's a costume designer working tirelessly to design the world of that film. It's actually one of the hardest jobs in the industry.
So remember, next time you see a costume you like on screen, that it took a designer and a whole team of people to bring that vision to life.